All right, welcome. Today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite books of all time, The Surrender Experiment by Michael A. Singer. You might recognize him. He's better well known for The Untethered Soul, another fantastic book. This is the story of how Michael Singer came to write The Untethered Soul. He goes back after The Untethered Soul had become a huge hit and recalls his life story and outlines exactly the process that went into creating the book and all the lessons that he had to acquire in leading up to it that ended up telling the story of this book. And so the wonderful thing about this, or the interesting thing about this that you could see here, this is how I highlight kind of ideas that I think are shareable, that other people could resonate with. And most of the time, if you look at some of my other books, you'll see that it's throughout the book that we have these little kind of page marks at the bottom. But as you can see in this one, the first half, or maybe even more than half, have basically none. I think there might have been one here. And that's because the first half of the book is just his life story. It's as if you were watching a documentary or a biopic movie about his life. And the first half just takes you through from his youth all the way through writing the book. And so if you really love documentaries, if you really love hearing people's story of how they came about to create their great work, this is a fantastic book. And I just can't wait for the movie that I know will one day come. And in the second half is really where he turns it on and kind of highlights all the lessons and insights that he took away from his time. And I found it to be one of the most jam-packed parts of any book that I've read, as far as lessons that we can apply to our life to increase our sense of joy and peacefulness and presence. And so I'm excited to share some of those with you guys now. So we'll skip ahead. I'll allow you to read his story in this first half of the book, and we'll just skip ahead to some of these lessons, some of these insights that I feel are so powerful. So let me read you the first one here. It says at the top, "Time and again, I was seeing that if I could handle the winds of the current storm, they would end up blowing in some great gift. I was beginning to view these storms as a harbinger to transformation. Perhaps change only takes place when there is sufficient reason to overcome the inertia of everyday life. Challenging situations create the force needed to bring about change. The problem is that we generally use all the stirred up energy intended to bring about change to resist change. I was learning to sit quietly in the midst of the howling winds and wait to see what constructive action was being asked of me." And this is something Michael Singer talks about constantly in this book. It's this idea that no matter what's going on in life, no matter what direction the wind blows, so to speak, no matter what opportunity presents itself, that it's all there for a reason, right? That we have everything that comes to us is there to serve a purpose. And since we cannot possibly zoom out and see what that purpose is or what it's leading to, the way for us to work through life is to consistently accept everything that comes our way as the perfect thing that we needed in that moment and to lean into it with all our heart. And so he talks about constantly in this book about these opportunities that came his way at the beginning of his journey. He would often resist them, right? He would get a certain job or a certain person would come into his life. Something would come up that he would resist, that it felt like him sometimes like it wasn't the right opportunity. His mind would tell him, I don't want to do this thing. And as he went about this work of what he calls relaxing and releasing, or of surrendering to whatever comes his way, he started to notice that all these things that he resisted would end up in time, sometimes many years down the road, he would finally get this perspective of how that thing led to exactly where he wanted to go. Even though it seemed to be pointing in a completely opposite direction at times, as he leaned into it, as he accepted this as his duty, as he took on this belief that the universe was providing for him opportunities where he could not possibly see the value of them, he started to notice that in looking back, once he had gone past it, once he had leaned in, once he had accepted it as his job to take it on with all his heart and his mind and his focus, that those things all ended up turning into magic, right? That everything that he had wanted came true, even though oftentimes it seemed like it was pointing in the opposite direction of where his mind wanted him to go. And through that, he started to develop this lesson that the voice we hear inside our head is not accurate and does not have the ability to zoom out and to see the value of the things that would come his way. And so I love that. It's one of my favorite lessons, or the favorite lesson that I've taken away from Michael Singer's books, is to take on each job as if it was meant for you directly. And we'll probably see one of the quotes where he talks about this, maybe even more so here, or sorry, maybe specifically here. The more I was willing to let go of the inner noise created by my personal likes and dislikes, the more I could see subtle synchronicities in what was unfolding around me. These unexpected concurrences of events were like messages from life gently nudging me in the direction she was going. I listened to these subtle nudges instead of listening to the not so subtle mental and emotional reactions caused by my personal preferences. This is how I practice surrender in everyday life. And the purpose of all these stories is to share with you the perfection of the journey that unfolded. And so that's exactly what we were just speaking about, that all these things started coming his way. And even though he felt intense resistance to many of them, as he would take them on and stop listening to that internal voice saying, I don't want to do this. This is too hard. This is boring. This is not the direction I wanted to go on. To go in, as he started ignoring that voice and persevering through it, he started to see the magic, or the synchronicities, as he calls it here, that began to unfold in front of him. And so this is such a powerful idea for us to take away, right? That oftentimes the things that we want, if we could zoom out, if we could have some perspective, if we could fast forward, 5-10 years down the road, often the things that we want most were not the things that we needed most. And conversely, the things that our minds offered huge resistance to, somehow magically, so many of those things that came our way did so in a manner that would evolve our spiritual being or our physical life or whatever it is, right? In all sorts of way, these moments kind of came together to illuminate a path that we didn't even know we were walking on and that we had no intention to take on, right? And so I love this message, and it just keeps coming up over and over in this book. And when you read the first half of the book here, right, it's the story of how that unfolded, right? So at the end of the book, all these parts that we're reading are more about the philosophical parts, right? These are the lessons that he took away. But when you read the first half of this book, which is the biography, the stories that of how his life unfolded, you can start to see that magic taking place in real time, right? This event that he resisted so much, and then he would fast forward 5 years and showcase exactly how that was exactly what he needed in that moment, and how it drove him forward toward the dreams that he either had in that moment or he didn't even realize he had yet, which is such a beautiful lesson. I just love it so much. Hi, Robert. Welcome. And so he says here, when push comes to shove, I don't care what it takes, just free me from myself. The only meaningful prayer is that this white hot fire be so destructive to the personal self that it severs the cord that binds. And this is such a beautiful idea. He's talking about in meditating the resistance that we so often feel to the task of just sitting with our thoughts, right? Releasing our attachment to the voice inside the head that is saying, I don't want to do this. This is boring. This is too hard. This is not working. I'm wasting my time. I have better things, more important things that need to get done. And he said, as he would sit through that, it felt like a fire was going on inside him, and that fire eventually became his motivation. That he didn't care how painful it was. He didn't care how loud the voice inside his head became, because his only task was to detach from that. Because in these little moments, he could see that when he did detach from that, that there was joy and stillness and presence and growth in those moments. And so at a certain point, he realized, I want to completely sever the attachment to the voice inside my head. And if you've read The Untethered Soul, that is really the story of how to do that, right? Or the instructional manual of how to do that. How do we disconnect from the voice inside our head? And also, if you've never explored that, like the why. Why do we want to disconnect? You know, if I'm not the voice I hear inside my head, then who am I? And he does a beautiful job in The Untethered Soul of explaining exactly that, right? I'm not the voice inside my head. I'm not my thoughts. I'm not my feelings. I'm not my emotions. And then the obvious question then becomes, then who am I? And according to Michael Singer and Eckhart Tolle and Don Miguel Ruiz of the Four Agreements and so many teachers like them, who I am is the one who observes those things. I'm the one who can zoom out, right? Inside my own head, I could zoom back. And Michael Singer constantly taps kind of like behind his head. And he says, you are not here at the forefront, pointing to the front of his face, to his eyes, and then moves his hand back to the back of his head. He says, this is where I am, the true self, the one who can sit back in the seat of my awareness and observe what my mind is doing, observe what I'm seeing, how the mind talks about it, how the mind judges it, how the mind resists or longs for things, right? I'm not that voice that's speaking on all that. I'm the one who observes that voice. I'm the one who can tap in and look at the emotions coming in my body and what they feel like and what they do inside there, right? I'm not the voice in my head. I'm the one who sees it, or the one who hears it, depending on how you want to look at it. He says here, I had surrendered, and this was the task life had given me. That made it a part of my spiritual journey, and I was fully prepared to devote myself to it to the absolute best of my ability. Right? And he, again, talks about this constantly throughout the book, that this task that was put in front of him, sometimes in the form of actual, things to do. For example, he didn't want to be a teacher, but he had an opportunity at a university. Something presented itself. Somebody really wanted him to come and teach. And he had such huge resistance because all he wanted to do was go to the woods and meditate. That was where he was in his life. But the universe just kind of kept bringing this opportunity up until the point where he decided to lean into it. And through the story, you hear about all the wonderful things that really, like, his entire life almost unfolded from this one event that he had resisted so hard. And so, as he talks about in the book, right, as these opportunities came in, he started to notice that the more resistance the mind gave, the more benefit there was to leaning into that opportunity. Right. And we all know this from our experience, something that, we didn't want to do. Think of something super simple, like you don't want to go for a walk, right? Somebody invites you out for a hike and you're like, I'm tired, it's not hot out or it's too hot out, whatever it is, right? We have these mental resistance. But then what happens when you actually get through that and you go on that walk, you go on that hike, you hang out with your friends? What happens, 90% of the time, if not more? You feel better. You feel gratitude for the fact that you were able to overcome that voice. And when you go out there, and people with social anxiety know this, it's often not as bad, right? Seneca has the quote, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. And we know this, anybody with social anxiety or really any kind of anxiety, that days leading up to the event are much more stressful than when we actually go through with it. Once we do, there's so much joy and a connection, right? To whether it's to other people or to nature, to the world, to yourself, right? There's this sense of connection that develops through this ability to overcome the resistance of the mind and to lean into the event or the opportunity that presents itself. He says, I'd become thoroughly convinced that the constant act of letting go of one's self-centered thoughts and emotions was all that was needed for profound personal, professional, and spiritual growth. Once again, kind of what meditation teaches us, right? As we separate from the voice inside the head, that is where all the goodness takes place, right? That is when all the healing, the spiritual growth, the stillness, the joy, the connection to source, the connection to the spirit of love for all people and all things, that's where it lives. It lives in the disconnection between my thoughts and who I truly am, between the false self and the true self or the higher self. I had seen time and again how what at first appeared to be a problem turned out to be a guiding force of change leading us forward. And you've probably seen this in your own life, this thing, once again, that as we resist, right, it persists. And the moment we surrender to it, the moment we let go, the moment we lean in, we start to find the goodness in it. And I say the moment kind of, in the macro sense of the word, because one of the great lessons I took away from this book was how long that actually sometimes takes to unfold, right? So in some of these instances where he had resistance to something and then leaned into it, it didn't immediately turn things around, right? He didn't immediately lose all that resistance, and the goodness that came out of it didn't show up instantaneously. In some parts of this book, he talks about taking on these opportunities, and it wasn't until 5, 7, 8 years later that the real meaning and the real purpose of it started to unfold. And so that was a really good lesson for me, that just because we do the right work, right, doesn't mean that necessarily it's going to change or to impact us in the way that we want immediately. But the more we do that and the more kind of stillness we take on, the more patience with the ways of the world, with the ways of the universe we take on, the greater the magic that tends to unfold in time, in its own time, right? Universe time, not person time. I was not living a life based on what I wanted or didn't want. Those types of thoughts has ceased passing through my mind long ago. I was way too busy trying to do the work life had given me. And if you think of, how much easier, how much less struggle would we face if we just let go of preferences, right? If we let go of this thought, something simple like, I know I should go for a run. I know it's good for me. When I do it, I feel good. And yet every time when I'm thinking of putting my shoes on, I feel that resistance, right? I hear the voice inside my head saying, I don't want to do this. This isn't for me. This is too hard. I'm too cold. I'm too tired, right? How much mental energy would we free up if we could just disattach ourselves from that voice and from the resistance, right? What if I just had this thought, it would be good for me to go for a run, and I could get up and I could go and I could just do it, right? Obviously, that would feel so much better, so much healthier, bring me so much more value than all the resistance, than spending all that time. Because even if I do, in the end, after all that resistance, still go out and do that run, then it's been marred by this kind of darkness that I've put over myself, right? Or, not me, but the mind has put over me. So I've now suffered for these however many minutes I was getting ready and dealing with that struggle. And yet, when I go out, it feels good. And so what was the purpose of it, right? What was the use of it? Over the years, I'd come to see that I really had no idea where life was going to put me on any given day. And in truth, it was none of my business. My job was to simply continue surrendering and serving what was put in front of me. Yeah, I love that. And imagine taking that sort of mindset every single morning. Imagine just waking up and deciding, I know the things that I have to do today, right? Take care of myself, take care of my family, whatever it is. But what if I didn't resist it? What if I just assumed that everything that was coming my way was exactly the way it was meant to be? And I didn't need to battle through that resistance constantly. Right? That what life put in front of me was none of my business. How freeing would that be? Let's do one or two more here. Again and again, I was seeing that each of these intensely challenging business experiences was very beneficial for my spiritual growth. I just kept letting go of whatever discomfort got stirred up within me, and inevitably, a stronger flow of spiritual energy took its place. Yes, exactly what we were just talking about. He says, if I saw my weakness, fear, or anxiety come up, I just deeply relaxed back into where I was watching from. I simply kept letting go of whatever came up. And this is what I mentioned earlier about this idea that Michael Singer constantly says, that you are not the person looking through your eyes, right? That is the mind. Who you are is the person back here as he taps kind of behind his head. You are the person observing the human having the experience of looking at something, listening to something, reading something, right? You are not the one experiencing that very thing. You are the one observing the one experiencing. And finally, for today, he said, life was molding me each day to become who I needed to be in order to handle tomorrow's tasks. All I had to do was to let go and not resist the process. And again, such a beautiful philosophy and would be so beneficial for us to take on, especially this idea of what I'm going through today is better prepping me for tomorrow. Because in that, we have to surrender a little bit because we can't possibly see what tomorrow brings, right? We have no idea how everything that we go through, we experience, we think, we feel today, we have no idea the value that it's going to have, whether it's tomorrow, physically the next day or somewhere down the line. And we all know this, right? Marcus Aurelius says, if you've lived 40 years, it's the same as if you'd lived 1,000, because everything repeats. And the great benefit of time, of growing old, is having gone through enough cycles of whatever it is that we start to have this perspective, this insight, as we start to see these patterns kind of unfold, right? I've felt this before. I've seen this before. I've gone through a struggle like this before. And we know, if you've had panic attacks, for example, right? And you've gotten through a period in your life of dealing with panic attacks. The second time, at least in my experience, the second cycle of that is so much easier than the first, not necessarily because the panic is less strong, but because you have this insight that, hey, I went through this and I overcame it. Losing a loved one, for example, or having someone in your life pass away is another example of that. The first time it's a brand new experiences and is just psyche shattering. It can be completely overwhelming because it's a brand new experience that you can't really understand until you experience it yourself. But the second time that happens, right, you have this insight that I went through it. It felt like this, this is the stuff that helped. This is the stuff that didn't help. And so the second time becomes easier, right? Not necessarily the event itself, but just this kind of knowing that I went through it and I made it through to the other side. And here I am going through the cycle again. And so, in those moments when we're going through those struggles, whether it's a death or panic attacks or depression or chronic pain, it's different the second time. We have this insight, and so the goal and what Michael Singer talks about here is that when we're in that moment for the first time, to recognize that life doesn't end here, meaning that all these lessons that I'm being forced kind of to learn through this experience, they're going to have value later on, right? There's going to be some goodness that comes out of this. If nothing else, then helping me recognize that I have the resilience to go through this experience and come out the other side, right? And Viktor Frankl of Man's Search for Meaning talks about that a lot. And I talk about it all the time on my streams, is that he said one of the three meanings of life, along with the love that you have for other people or your great work, whatever it is that you're supposed to leave here on this earth. The third thing that gives life meaning is how you react in what he calls unavoidable suffering. That the simple act of persevering, of putting one foot in front of the other, of getting through whatever struggle it is that you're going through, that simple act gives meaning to life. And for some people, that's all the meaning that they need, right? Just this knowledge that I went through this, I came out the other side, and here I am. That has value, that has merit, because the next time we go through it, we have that insight. I did it, and I'm still here, so I can do it again, and I can come out the other side. And what better lesson is there to that, to alleviate our suffering, than to know that this suffering is transient like everything else. It has a start point, it has an end point, at least it has a peak. Maybe, if you think of losing someone close to you, it might not have necessarily an end point, but it does have a peak, and life does go on, and I get to the other side, and I can still feel joy, and I can still laugh, and I can still love, even though in this moment it feels like that's never going to happen. But we don't know that until we go through it. And so the value of each experience, the value of today is often not seen today. It's seen sometimes very far in the future, but there's value there. And so approaching each day with this mindset of, it might suck today, but there's a reason for it. And if nothing else, it's teaching me how to be resilient, and that I am resilient without really having to do anything but continue moving forward. So I love that. One of the most powerful lessons for me in this book, and something I think about often, is let me just lean into whatever is happening today, because I know somewhere down the road, even though it doesn't seem like it right now, that some goodness is going to come out of this, even if only to show me that I can suffer, that I can withstand that pain and continue moving forward. So that's it for today. I hope that's been helpful. If you enjoy this, you can come join us in our book club, theacademyofselfhelp.com, where we try and surround ourselves with these sorts of ideas and these books and these lessons from these wise teachers every single day. Thank you for hanging out. Thank you for being here. And I'll see you next time. Lots of love, friends.